When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
All right, hello YouTube. Welcome back to the Grease Comedy channel. Today's video, we're going to be continuing our Song of Ice and Fire reread, and specifically the first book, A Game of Thrones. We're going to be doing Dany IV, and I'm not going to lie, Dany's chapters early in the first book are fantastic. I've been basically writing down all of the chapters, giving them a rating, and I'm having a list so that by the time we get to the end of this book, I'm going to rank every single chapter and the POVs. And all of Dany's chapters so far are like top 15. So all I'm going to say is she's got some banger chapters early on. But it's been a while since we've actually had a Dany chapter. I looked back and it felt like it had been a while. We haven't talked about Dany in the reread in 3 months. So we're going to do a little bit of a recap just so you guys remember where we left off. And then we'll get into the chapter. So the last time that we saw Dany had really kind of started to step up for herself. And she is someone that started to really grow into her character. She stands up to Viserys, and she's really starting to understand her role in the Khalasar as the Khaleesi. She is someone that is beginning to understand how to gain power over Khal Drogo, as again, she basically takes control, right? In the Khalasar, having sex is based on the idea of the Khal being in the dominant position, and now Dany is going to flip that. So she's kind of taken a lot of that power. She's really started to go into the culture of the Khalasar, or the Dothraki. And at the very end, the big twist was that she was actually pregnant. So we haven't seen her in a while. She's been a topic of discussion in other POVs, but now we're catching up with her on her way and arriving at Vaes Dothrak. So that will lead us to the beginning of the chapter at page 385. The chapter opens with the Khalasar passing through the horse gate of Vaes Dothrak, just like the one I have on the screen that was shown in the show. We see two beautiful horses rearing and facing each other about 100 feet above them, creating an arch of sorts. So I guess if we look at this image in the background, it may be a little bit taller than this, as this doesn't really seem like 100 feet to me. But more or less, this is a decent representation. Dany notes that she has no idea why a gate is needed, as there are no walls nor any buildings that she can see. And so really it's pretty much just used to signify like this is the start of the Dothraki homeland and kind of that whole idea. Also, it's kind of a little bit of some foreshadowing as to the idea that the Dothraki really don't build, they take things. And that's something we'll talk about a little bit later on in the chapter. Now, something I noted, because we are going to get to this idea of the Dothraki stealing things, is like, how do they transport all of these great statues and things? Because I would assume they're not very light. So do they have their slaves do it? That's something that's not really brought up in this chapter, or I don't really think it's brought up at all, but I would be interested to see how they transport some of these great monuments and statues. Dany was joined by Jorah and Viserys on the sides of her, and she notes how Viserys has been granted a horse once again. So again, if we go back to the last Dany chapter, Viserys had lost his horse, right? He had put hands on Viserys, and so he lost his horse. And that was a really big deal with the Dothraki. Again, remember, the Dothraki culture is all about kind of horses, your mount, and if you get that taken from you, it's kind of the ultimate disrespect. Because again, the only people that don't really ride horses are kind of like slaves, older people, young children, things like that. And we also see that he has been mocked as the Sorefoot King. So not only is he the Beggar King, but he's also the Sorefoot King. He actually is going to get another name as well, unfortunately for him, known as the Cart King. But Drogo had only made this worse, as he had offered Viserys to be placed in a cart, to which Viserys agreed. Viserys is still not understanding why this would be such a bad thing. And I just mentioned it, why, riding a horse is so important to them. But unfortunately, he did not know that the carts were for cripples, eunuchs, pregnant women, the old, and the young, giving him his second nickname, the Cart King. And so that'll get us into page 386. But something I want to note is, like, we again see that Viserys continues to fall in the social class of the Dothraki. He has no respect. And when Viserys is trying to be this character of a king, well, you have to have some sort of respect or fear or love of something. He has none of these things. Now, Viserys had felt like Drogo had been apologizing for Dany's previous treatment of him, which was not the case at all right? Again, I just kind of mentioned this, that Dothraki and Drogo specifically don't really like Viserys. Dany had made Jorah not to tell him, but had taken all of Dany's bed tricks to convince Drogo to allow him to return to the front of the Khalasar with a horse. So again, we see more of Dany using what influence she has. Again, we see this society where women don't particularly have a lot of power. So how do a lot of women gain that power? Well, it's influencing their husbands and things of that nature. So Dany is already learning that, and that's something that she's going to use a lot with just being able to trick men and things like that. Jorah had wanted to tell Viserys, as he had believed that Viserys could use this shame, to which I am not sure what to think of at this point with Viserys on if shame would have actually made Viserys any better. As we're going to see going forward, Dany is going to give Viserys plenty of times of shame, and, you know, that's going to happen in this chapter, and Viserys deserves it, right? But Viserys at this point, I think, is too far gone. He's lived a life this whole time being pretty much lied to. Has the whole weight of the Targaryen dynasty on his shoulders. I've talked about this in my Viserys character analysis video. I'd really check that out if you guys haven't. It really ties in really well to kind of the topic we're talking about today. But Viserys at this point, I think, is too far gone, right? He shouldn't have even come with the Dothraki, something Jorah is going to note, but yeah, I think at this point, there really is no saving Viserys. Dany then asks, where are all the buildings? And Jorah responds, under the mountain, as Dany had only seen the stolen monuments and statues of conquered civilizations. But she specifically notes 3 of an interest: a dragon with jewels in his eyes, a roaring griffin, and a manticore poised to strike. Now let's look at the foreshadowing here. The roaring griffin, we would look at Jon Con and all the problems that's going to come up later on. You look at a dragon with jewels in the eyes, that could just be simply the dragons are going to be coming back. And the manticore, well, Dany gets attacked by a manticore in the coming books. So all of these are nice little nods to things that will happen to Dany later on. But the real beautiful ones were the ones that Jorah said were from Ashai and Shadowlands beyond it. Again, kind of building up this mystique of Ashai and the Shadowlands, because again, we still haven't really seen this area, and we may not ever. So just kind of building on that mystique there. Also, just giving you the idea of how much the Dothraki are a warring civilization, as they captured so many monuments. Again, showing how formidable they are. And it's going to build upon the idea that if the Dothraki did come over to Westeros, how would that go? Dany is impressed by this, as to a degree she could be viewing ancient history, and Viserys is not so impressed. He says this is the trash of dead cities. This makes Dany anxious as she looks around to see if any of the Khalasar had heard him. He was careful to speak common tongue. He continues saying all they know how to do is steal and kill from better men, and that built these things. But they do not know how to, but they do know how to kill, which is important to Viserys's plans. Now, yeah, again, we see the idea that you are mocking Dothraki culture. Again, a big no-no, and Viserys just really has he's very carefree about how he talks, because again, he believes himself as a king above all of these people. But I will say, is Viserys wrong? I mean, these are stolen monuments. These are things that, again, were built by maybe better men when it comes to actually art and things like that. The Dothraki don't do that. Now, again, the Dothraki are great killers and things like that, which Viserys notes. So maybe not a complete wrong statement, but yeah, so that'll get us into page 387. Dany pipes up saying that these are her people and she should not call them savages. Viserys, who obviously has not learned his lesson from the last time, says the dragon can speak how he would like, mocking the Khalasar for not knowing the common speech. He continues asking how long they must wait here before Drogo gives him his army, and Jorah says that Dany must be brought to the Dosh Khaleen. And Viserys interrupts saying, yes, those crones, and continues stating there is to be some mummer show of prophecy of Dany's child. Again, for Viserys, this just is all a waste of time, right? Viserys wants to go back to reclaim Westeros, all of these things. I think another thing that I think is interesting, Viserys doesn't really seem to understand that even to get to Westeros, he's going to need a lot of ships. I just don't, where does Viserys plan to get the coin for this? I think Viserys is really thinking very short-sighted. Like, even if he gets this army, which very unlikely, how is he going to even transport it over? How is he going to feed this said army? And that's all things we're going to see that Khal Drogo takes on. When Dany and Drogo, or when Dany convinces Drogo to take Westeros, they have to raid. They have to get slaves to sell, to build up the coin, to get ships, to get food. How is that going to work? Viserys isn't really thinking about that. But also, again, we have the introduction of the Dosh Khaleen, which is very important to the Dothraki culture, as basically their word is law in Vaes Dothrak. And so, yeah, they're going to have this whole ritual for Dany's child, the stallion that mounts the world. And again, Viserys doesn't really think very highly of Dany, and he believes that he is the one that's really important. And again, it's going to be this continued idea that Viserys is the one not getting this attention, not getting this respect, and all of these things, and Dany is, and her child is more specifically. Viserys says that he is tired of eating horse meat and of these rags and the smell of them. Dany notes how all of Viserys' fine clothes he had brought from Pentos were filthy and tattered from use. Because again, Viserys' clothes are really not meant for the Dothraki culture. The Dothraki culture is one that is a very difficult life, and all of these rich clothes just is not really the right choice. It's kind of this nice idea that Viserys is kind of a outlier, right? He is someone that doesn't belong in this culture. He does not fit in, just like his clothing doesn't really fit into how this lifestyle works. Jorah pipes up saying that at the West's market there will be traders with food more to his liking, and the cow will fulfill his promise in his own time. Viserys says he was promised a crown, and the dragon does not wait. Viserys is then distracted by a statue with 6 breasts and leaves them. Which is, I think, a very interesting point, because he says the dragon does not wait, but inherently Viserys has been waiting for quite a while. So really interesting line there. But that will continue us on with Dany noting that she hopes Drogo does this soon, which is very interesting to think about here, because even though Viserys has already proved to Dany that he's not a great dude, right? She knows this, but she still gives him passes. It's kind of that mental abuse that's going there where she's forgiving him. And also we have this idea that, again, Viserys is Dany's only family, so she's trying to make excuses for him. I do think it's really interesting that she still thinks that Drogo would even give Viserys an army. And it's another idea here to build upon why I love Dany's character in this first book so much, is that, yes, she's taken strides, she's understanding her power, she's understanding, what I have to do to integrate into Dothraki culture, but she's still not this person that is taking on the responsibility of House Targaryen. She's still not the main character, Daenerys Targaryen, Daenerys Stormborn. She's not that person yet that she's going to be in future books. And this is kind of just one of those moments where you really understand that. And I really love that Dany's character continues to grow, because even by the end of this chapter, she's going to kind of shatter that perspective there. But another thing I want to note here is that even if Viserys was someone more powerful, someone that gave off the presence of being greater, stronger, more powerful, like Aegon the Conqueror, I don't know if Drogo would crown him. I just don't think that's the Dothraki way. And so Viserys thinking that he's going to get this crown from Drogo, in the sense that he thinks it, not what it was going to end up happening, it just seems very off. And Jorah kind of explains this perfectly. But he looks at her doubtfully and says that Viserys should have stayed in Pentos. The Khalasar is no place for him. Dany again says that once the promise of 10,000 men and the crown is fulfilled, he will leave. Again, Dany is still very young and naive and believes this is going to happen. I just do not see a way that, Drogo does this. And also the Dothraki, again, how Jorah is going to say here in a second when I'll get to it, but that's not really the way the Dothraki do these trades or traditional Westerosi deals. And Jorah counters that the Dothraki look on things differently. So I want to look at something that's very interesting, that's very similar to the way we look at Viserys trading Dany for this alleged crown and or army. So let's look at the way Pentos happens. Again, the people of Pentos, or again, the people in power, give a lot to Khal Drogo to avoid any type of conflict, to avoid fighting them. So they give things in return for not being killed. And part of that Drogo could see that as, oh, Dany was part of that. Because again, that happens in Pentos. Illyrio is someone that is part of this. That's how he could have easily have viewed this. And also just the idea of Drogo not killing Viserys is that, oh, Dany is the reason. Drogo, again, may see it as you were a gift to him. And yes, Drogo will give Viserys a gift back in return, but in his own time. And you do not demand anything of a cow. And that gets us into page 388. So moving on, Dany says that it is not right to make him wait. She was not sure why she was protecting him. Again, this idea that Dany still has some love for him as he is her last family. And she, I think, has a lot of pity on him because she sees all of his flaws. She sees how I think I view Viserys as this character that could have been much different, but because of his upbringing, because of the pressures and stresses that were put on him, he's become this person that is cruel, who's an idiot. And another thing I want to point here is that if this is true, right? If that, you know, Drogo is not going to give these things to Dany, like, or to Viserys, but he'll give Viserys some sort of gift, you actually have to see this from Dany's point of view as well, because in that regard, Dany was sold to Drogo for almost no reason. So it's almost a double-edged sword where Dany sees kind of her role in this as well as feeling bad for Viserys. Dany continues saying that Viserys has said he can defeat the kingdoms with 10,000 Dothraki screamers, which is very interesting. Because Jorah is going to straight up say Viserys couldn't do this, and he has a really awesome line, is that he could not sweep a stable with 10,000 brooms, which really does speak to the incompetence of Viserys. But Dany kind of asks this, like, if this was a different leader, right? And she doesn't even actually imply herself. I think she's implying her child more than she's implying herself. And even Drogo, to a degree, if they had a different leader, could they take Westeros? And Jorah notes that at first he had just saw half-naked barbarians, but now he is uncertain. There are 40,000 men with Drogo now, all skilled, with highly skilled on horseback, and can easily shoot on horseback and have longer range bows than in Westeros. So again, there's a lot of uncertainty here, but there's a lot of factors that we're going to discuss after I get done with kind of this little speech, and we'll kind of talk about it. Let me know what you guys think. Could an army of the Dothraki invade and actually take Westeros? Dany asks, is 40,000 really that many? And Jorah notes that it is how many men Rhaegar brought to the Trident, but only maybe a tenth were knights. The rest free riders, peasants, etc. If you put that army up against a Khalasar, how long would they stand? That's a great point. And I think that's something else that's really not talked about here is that something that's different between the example that Jorah gives in this scenario. The whole issue, I think, with the battle at the Trident is, I think when you look at both sides, there was just there were different advantages, right? Where Robert's side was more battle-tested, they had a cause that they were willing to fight much more for. The Loyalist force under Rhaegar didn't have that, right? Like, maybe the Dornish had this idea of, oh, okay, well, you know, Elya's being kind of held hostage, so they had something maybe to fight for, but they also didn't like the king they were fighting for. And then you had kind of the other Loyalist forces where you're like, what are we really fighting for Rhaegar's lusts? Like, you look at the differences there, and when you look at if the Dothraki were on one side, the forces of Westeros would be much more united. They would understand why they're fighting. They would have much more motivations to fight harder. Now, with that being said, I think if you do meet the Dothraki on the field, you are dumb. Now, this little spiel that Jorah kind of gives is more or less the conversation that we ended up getting with Robert and Cersei in the show, where they talk about, okay, how would they do this? So this was something that was interesting, is that I really like that they gave Jorah's speech here with Dany actually to Cersei and Robert, because it's really interesting to think about how they would defend Westeros. But that gets into 389, and we'll kind of talk about what Jorah thinks about if they were to invade. So Jorah says that you would be a fool to meet them in the field, and the issue with the Dothraki would be not being able to siege a castle. They have no real equipment or discipline to do so. So again, I want to look at this. If the Dothraki invaded by themselves, they didn't have the dragons or anything like that, and they just invaded, how would this go? And I really do think there's a good chance Drogo could win. But the issue would be, it depends what Robert would do. And that's what Jorah talks about in this page. Like, Jorah is someone that would not hide, or Robert is not someone that would hide behind his walls. He would at some point get sick of being basically a coward or of that, and he would meet them on the battle. And if he did that, they would lose. Now the question would be, what do you do with this invading force of the Dothraki? Because they're going to kill all of your peasants, they're going to kill all of the farms, they're going to take all of your resources. Eventually, you're going to starve out. So if the Dothraki did it right and basically just started taking out all of the resources of Westeros and isolating all of these pockets of Westeros, maybe they could do something. But how would they ever take out all of these fortresses? That's the problem. And that's when we look at, you know, Dany coming over and why it's so hard to defeat her, is because she's going to have this force where if you meet her on the field and she has a Dothraki like we think she's going to, how do you meet them on the field? You can't. Well, if you sit in your castle, she has the Unsullied, probably the most disciplined force in the world. She's going to have siege engines. We've seen her be able to siege castles before. She has the dragons, so you can't sit in your castle because Dany has all the forces to still be able to kill you, especially with the dragons, but you can't meet them on the field either. I think that's one of the biggest issues for George going forward with that plot line, because Dany is just way too overpowered right now. But let's get back kind of into the chapter. Dany then asks if Robert would meet them, and Jorah says that yes, he probably would, as he should have been born Dothraki himself, as Robert would not hide. But the issues is more the men around him, like Tywin, his brother Stannis, and Jorah notes bitterly, Ned Stark. Jorah notes that Ned took everything from him over some poachers, and Dany notes still the pain of loss he feels. And Jorah changes the subject instantly, pointing out the horse city of Vaes Dothrak. Vaes Dothrak looked huge, 10 times bigger than Pentos, but at the same time smaller and not altogether alike. There was random buildings or wooden broken towers everywhere. We really get this idea that this city is very different. Like, if you go to any normal like town, you'll kind of see like the same building structure. Like where I live right now, my subdivision, a lot of the houses look very similar. This is the opposite of that. It's like if you had one house is like built in this certain way, and another house is built this certain way. Then you have another house that's more worn down, but then another house that's kind of newer. It's basically you taking all these mixes of culture and smushing them into one city, so it looks really odd. Like, think about it like this. If you put a bunch of different cultures together, like Chinese, you put together English history, Mexican, Spanish, all of these different cultures, and you put them together in their building styles, inherently, the city is just going to look weird. Like, it's just going to, because everything's going to look different. But Jorah at this point notes that Viserys was not wrong, and that they do not build. All of this was built by slaves from all over, who built these with the customs of their culture. Again, kind of getting back to the point I was talking about. But that'll lead us into page 390. So moving on to page 390, Dany asks where all the people are. And Jorah notes that seldom does anyone stay in Vaes Dothrak, outside of the Dosh Colleen, their slaves and servants. With that being said, the area is large enough for all of the Khalasars, and it prophesies that all of them will join at some point. Drogo then finally called a halt near the eastern market of traders from Ashai, Waiti, and other lands. Dany was forced to smile as she had been told by a slave back with Illyrio of how the palace that they would be staying at would be 200 rooms large and rich, when in reality it was a great wooden feasting hall, not this grand thing that Dany had been expecting. Drogo had sent an army of slaves to prepare for their coming, and at this moment Drogo and the rest of the Khalasar disarm, as Vaes Dothrak it was forbidden to carry weapons or to shed another free man's blood. Even warring Khalasars would set aside differences would drink together and eat together under the mountain, or the mother of mountains. Now this is interesting because could you imagine Westerosi culture doing this? Like, Westerosi people have such this racism towards the Khalasar and the Dothraki and all this, but even in this place, they're able to set aside the differences, eat and drink together. It's really interesting the way we look at the Dothraki culture, and when you look at how the War of the Five Kings is going to start, and warring as a whole in Westeros, it's much more built upon the idea of, you know, personal grudges, personal issues, and these large families going to war against each other. The average person really not having any problems with what's going on, or the average person really not being involved in what the major conflict of the war is. And so we look at that and we go, wow, I mean, maybe some of the people in Westeros could take something from the Dothraki in this idea. And, you know, that's not to say the Dothraki don't have their issues, right? They war a lot. They are a warring people. But this is one of those moments where you look at the Dothraki and how they kind of are advanced and are able to have some of these meetings and such. And that will get us into page 391. So moving into 391, here the Dosh Khaleen rule that they are all as one. And at this point, Kaholo, one of Drogo's blood riders, came to Dany. Dany notes that he is a bald man and toothless from a mace he had taken from a sellsword which had bound his life to Drogo's. Dany notes that at first she had believed the blood riders to be a Kingsguard of sorts, but learned that that was not the case. Yes, they were kind of these guards, but they were more than that. They were Drogo's brothers. They were tied to him by fate. If Drogo died, the Blood Riders would also die, but they would live long enough to avenge their cow and then would die. And this was because this was so that the cow would not be alone in the Nightlands, and that his Blood Riders would ride with him in them. It was said that in many Khalasars they shared everything except for the cow's horse. Again, the horse being just this major importance in the Dothraki culture. And Dany is happy that Drogo does not keep a lot of the ancient ways. We see that Drogo is very progressive in a lot of ways. If we just look at the way Drogo chooses his wife, the relationships that he is kind of forming, very different, very progressive from Drogo. It's going to get even more when he is going to cross the sea for her. And again, just looking at this idea that even these blood riders in a lot of Khalasars would share his wife and would share his food and all of these things. Dany notes that Kaholo was nice enough to her, but the others, Hago and Quatho, frightened her. But Dany accepts them as they are tied to Drogo by life and death. She sometimes thought that she wished men like this were with her father. Again, looking at the Kingsguard during this point, and if we look at Kingsguard throughout history, they are susceptible to corruption. If you even look at the Kingsguard now, there's Kingsguard that are in the pocket of the Lannisters and all of this. Everyone has their own motivations, but when you have a system like this where you as a blood rider are tied to your cow, it makes things much easier, because if this person dies, you also die, so you want to protect them at all costs. It really negates any of that other stuff going on. And so you can definitely understand why Dany would want these type of people for, you know, her father and her family, because Jaime Lannister, who was a Kingsguard, was the one that ended up killing her father. Now, also, she notes something about Barristan, which I think is a really interesting note, especially when we see that Barristan is going to come into service of Dany, is that she notes that even Barristan had gone over to Robert's side, which is really weird, because Barristan fought and nearly died at the Trident for the Targaryens. And after Rhaegar died, the war was over, right? There was no reason to continue fighting for the Targaryen side. It was over. And so I don't understand, like, did she want Barristan to just die? Like, she does realize that the oath goes for life. So whoever the new king is, Barristan is sworn to serve that new king as well. But Dany questions that if all men were false in Westeros, because of all of these kind of betrayals that she sees from the King's Guard. But this will lead us into page 392. Dany continues saying that when her son takes the throne, she will make sure he has good blood riders to protect him. Now, I think this is interesting to note because, again, like I talked about, Dany still is not this character that is like, I'm going to take the Iron Throne. I'm going to be the one to avenge House Targaryen. At first, it was Viserys. Now it's her son. Holo tells her that Drogo must go to the Mother of Mountains tonight, and Dany is a bit thankful, as she would enjoy the break. She's pregnant, so she is someone that's been growing more tired, but this has only inflamed Drogo's lust for her. She was also happy to know that she would not have to ride tomorrow and would be staying in the same place for the first time really since Pentos. Again, remember, she has been riding every day. They've been traveling and migrating to like just Vaes Dothrak ever since leaving Pentos. She was led to a hollow hill that had been prepared for her, and Drogo that felt like a tent made of dirt. She requests for a bath and loves that the water is scalding hot, as she likes it. She notes that tonight she will give Viserys gifts to make him look a real king amongst the Dothraki, and asks Doria to, again, keyword here, invite Viserys to dinner. She notes that he liked her more because Illyrio had let him bed her, and also because she was not Dothraki. Again, more racism from Viserys. She then wants Irri to go get fruit and meat, but not horse meat. Again, Dany is just making all of these things to try and repair her relationship with her brother, getting the kind of food he likes, giving him gifts that will hopefully make him fit in with the Dothraki and gain more of their respect. Irri brought back some goat, some fruits, and vegetables. And Dany notes the gifts she had made for him were a white linen tunic and leggings, leather sandals that laced to the knee, a bronze medallion belt, and lastly, a leather vest with the fire-breathing dragons of House Targaryen. Dany notes that the Dothraki must respect her more if he does not look the beggar. And again, think about these gifts. I mean, you can tell how long Dany thought about these gifts and really put a lot of effort into having them made for Viserys. And it's really what's going to inflame this next interaction that's going to happen between her and Viserys. And it really shows that Dany did try, right? Dany did try to make Viserys more likable. She tried everything. Maybe she could have gone about things differently. Being a little bit more straight up with Viserys, maybe. I don't know. Because lying to Viserys about kind of what was going on and how he was being mocked probably did not help either. But that will get us into page 393. Dany hoped that this will begin to heal their relationship, and she hopes he forgives her for shaming him in the last Dany chapter. And again, Dany still notes that he is still her king and brother. So again, the relationship is not fractured for Dany. Yes, Dany has kind of has stepped up against him and not letting him do cruel actions to her and things of that nature, but at the same time, she still has that love and respect for him. Dany had just been preparing her last gift, a green cloak for him, when Viserys marches in with Doria being dragged along by her hair. Her eyes were red from where he hit her. He states, "You dare send this whore to give me commands," and shoves her to the ground. And again, we're right off the bat seeing Viserys just, how did this happen, right? This was supposed to be a nice little dinner, and it just goes from 0 to 100 within seconds. And we see how quickly it is that this happens. Now, again, in Viserys' position, he is this character that's been built up as, people telling him he is the king and all this. And so when Doria tells him that Dany commands him to come to this dinner, it's everything that Viserys hates. Dany has all the power. She's the one gaining all this respect. And now she thinks that she can command Viserys. So I understand why Viserys is mad. He shouldn't be hitting her and all these things, but I definitely understand why Viserys acts the way he does. He should understand, though, that this was just a miscommunication, which he does not. Dany again is shocked by this outburst of anger and asks what Doria had said. And again, I basically just said it, that she had said that Dany had commanded him to dinner with her, which is obviously not what Dany wanted. And Viserys is pissed, saying, "No one commands the dragon. I should have sent back her head." Dany instantly refutes this, saying that no one will hurt you, Doria, and that the girl misspoke. Dany wanted to ask for his present if it pleases you. Dany then takes Viserys by the hand and looks to show him the gifts she had made for him. Viserys suspiciously asks what it is. Dany shows him the new clothes, and Viserys sneers, saying these are Dothraki rags. And I think for Dany, this just has to be the ultimate disrespect, because you spent all of this time doing this. I talked about this already. And here is Viserys, who's being this arrogant brat once again, not understanding what Dany's trying to do for her, making everything so violent, so cruel, this being just being Viserys. And yeah, that's going to come out in this next little bit here. Dany tries to defend it, saying that this will feel better for him and be cooler, and that she thought if you dressed Dothraki, but she stops. Not sure how to say it without pissing him off, which is an interesting statement. Like, how do you tell someone, like, yeah, like, if you dressed more like them, maybe they would actually respect you? Like, I understand why Dany is not really able to say that, but Viserys again mocks her by saying, next you'll want to braid my hair. And Dany has had enough. She's tired of being mocked. She's tired of Viserys just being a cruel bastard. And she thinks why he must always be so cruel. And she says that he has no right to any braids. He's not won any battles yet. Now, I will say this is a kind statement because she says yet. So that implies that, oh, he could. She could have just said, you've won no battles and you never will. But, you know, she still has a nicer response. And she instantly sees the fury in Viserys' eyes, but he dare not do anything, with a lot of witnesses about, with her handmaidens next to her, and also her guards outside. He notes that the cloak smells of manure, and maybe he will use it as a horse blanket, again provoking Dany and continuing this divide between the two. This will get us into page 394. Dany is obviously wounded by this. She has put a lot of effort and thought into this, and into these gifts, and Viserys was throwing it in her face. She knows that these garments were fit for a cow, which again displeases Viserys. Again, the whole idea here is Viserys believes that he is better than every single person. He is the person that is the king. He should not be dressing down to the level of a savage cow in his mind. And Viserys even notes this. He is no savage cow with bells in his hair. He is the lord of the 7 kingdoms. He says that she forgets herself and grabs her arm, saying that big belly will not protect you if you wake the will not protect you if you wake the dragon, which is a wild thing to say to a mother. I think I can, you know, I'm not a mother or a father, so I can't really speak to this, but if you threaten a child, their mother will protect them to the end. So that was the worst thing to say. And this is the last straw. Dany her child has now been threatened. This relationship is now just irreparable. His fingers dug into her arm painfully, and for one instant, she was back to being a child again. Again, showing that she's not fully this Daenerys Stormborn character yet. But no more. With her free hand, she grabs the bronze medallion belt and with all her strength hits him hard across the face. Viserys instantly lets go of her and blood comes running down his cheek. Dany then responds, kind of in how the background image looks like. He is the one who forgets himself. He has already forgotten what happened in the grass. Now be gone before she summons her cause to drag him out and pray that Drogo does not hear of this, or he will cut open your belly and feed you your own entrails. Again, the dragon side of Dany finally comes out. Viserys says that she will regret this day when he comes to his kingdom. Viserys then exits, and Dany is informed dinner is ready, to which Dany has lost all appetite. This has completely ruined her mood. She's completely kind of destroyed by the way that this interaction has gone down, and she says that she's not hungry. She says to share the meal between her handmaidens, and also to send some to Jorah. She asked for one of her 3 eggs to be sent to her. The deep green egg was brought to her, and she laid down and curling it next to her, she notes how she enjoyed holding them. She seemed to draw strength, bravery, and courage from them. Again, showing this connection that the dragons and the Targaryens have, as we've always seen this throughout these first 4 chapters, that whenever Dany is at her lowest point, she needs that strength. It's the dragon dreams, or it's the eggs, or it's thinking about her heritage that always gives her that strength. And something else I think is very interesting is that the egg that she's actually holding will turn into Rhaegal. And think about how she's been kind of thinking about Rhaegar the Trident, and also what her child is going to be named in Rhaego. So just a nice little note there. I also thought it would have been cool if she would have actually had Viserion as egg here, because then it would have been a nice little, okay, that relationship between her and Viserys is gone. But this is Rhaegal's egg. And so that gets us into the last page of the chapter, 395. She was still lying there when she felt the child within her almost reaching for the egg. Again, showing that Rhaego has some sort of connection to Rhaegal. And Dany notes this seems brother to brother, and that her son is the true dragon. Dany falls asleep dreaming of home. Again, one of Dany's many themes in this idea of having a home, which she really has not had. And so a really nice ending. It's one of Dany's, again, better chapters. She has really great chapters early on in this book, and it's really her coming into her own and just more and more foreshadowing to the dragons coming back, showing that there's something in this egg. Her child can feel it. And even the strength that Dany is getting, she feels it, even though she may not know it. So thank you guys all for watching this video, and I will say I'm pleasantly surprised. I really enjoy doing Dany chapters. When you're kind of bombarded in this reread with Ned chapters, it's like every other Ned chapter, or every other chapter I'm doing is a Ned chapter. It's really nice to go to a Dany chapter where it's just really great, solid growth. It's great lore for a lot of places that we just aren't at really in the main story. So yeah, thank you guys all for watching. I'll see you guys all in the next one. Bye, guys.